Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Better. Normally the pool in front of the heart tree in the Godswood looked inviting. The water was always warm and still. Today, however, he was looking at it with a real sense of unease as he stood there with Robert, Edric, and Ned. The issue was a simple one. Did the pool contain Vermax's eggs? And if so, how could they get to them? And who should go into it? It had been Robert's idea that the natural place for a dragon to lay their eggs had to be in the hot springs in the Godswood. But now that they were all there and looking into the pool, certain nagging doubts were running through his head. Well, judging by the others all their heads. How deep is it? Ned asked as they peered into it. It goes down to a warm place, Bran said carefully. Now that they were there and looking at it, well, things seemed rather different. And if he had to admit it, dangerous. I don't know how far down. But the eggs might be there, Edric said again with slightly less confidence than he had before. I mean, it's warm in there. Dragons liked warm places. They all stood there and stared at the pool again. All of a sudden he had a lot of butterflies in his stomach. Perhaps this wasn't a very good idea. But then, where else would Vermax have laid those eggs? He was in the process of opening his mouth to say something when someone cleared their throat behind them in a very meaningful manner. They all froze. Oh no, he turned his head. Shireen was standing there, arms crossed, eyebrow raised. And what? Shireen said in a voice that made her sound exactly like her father. Do you think you are doing? They traded shifty looks, daring the others to break the silence. Finally, Robert pointed at the pool. It makes sense that Vermax's eggs are in a place that Vermax couldn't have reached without tearing down the Godswood and enraging everyone, and certainly every Stark in Winterfell. Silence fell as they all thought about that. Then Ned raised a hand. What if Vermax hovered in the air above the Godswood, just above the pool, and, aimed and... He was cut off by Shireen raising a hand, and then, lips twitching, closing her eyes and shaking her head as she grimaced. Ned, no. Just no. Now enough of this nonsense. It's almost time for the midday meal and there's training to be done after that. Deeply deflated, the boys eyed each other again and then sloped off. Bran felt secretly relieved. He was glad that he wouldn't be diving into the pool. Summer was off to one side, rolling on his back on a tree root to get at an itch, probably. And he rubbed the direwolf's furry tummy, making him squirm. And then, as the others vanished off through the trees, he saw the direwolf freeze and then stare upwards at about the same time that he heard something snap far above his head. He looked up at the red canopy above him. Nothing, until a white twig hit the ground to one side. Something was up there. But what? Bran? It was Edric's voice, and he turned. Are you coming? In a bit, I'll meet you in the Great Hall. And then he went back to staring upwards into the branches. There was a faint breeze blowing that rustled the leaves, but he suddenly had the very strong feeling that someone or something was watching him closely. Oddly enough, he felt no threat, just caution. He walked to the heart tree and peered up again. Hello? Is there anyone up there? There was a soft creak, and again a twig seemed to snap. Who are you? My friends are gone. It's just me here, and my direwolf, Summer. My name is Bran. A pause. More silence. Hello? Something creaked again to one side. Bran looked but saw nothing, and then, as he looked back, he froze in place. There was a figure hanging by its hands and feet from a branch above. It had brown skin, largish ears, was wearing a green jerkin, and was studying him intently through reddish eyes. He never knew how long he stood there, staring upwards at that figure, lost in wonder, and then it seemed to sigh a little. Dropped down onto a branch, pivoted with an inhuman grace, bounded onto its feet, and then dropped lightly to the mossy earth by the trunk of the heart tree. Bran swallowed. She had 3 fingers that ended in black nails and was studying him closely. After a moment she leant back and sniffed. Hello, Stark. He was lost for words for a moment. Hello? Then he rallied. Are you one of the children of the forest? The reddish eyes almost rolled for a moment. Yes, I am. I didn't know that there were any left in the north. Something flickered in those eyes. We remain here and there. We were away, protecting ourselves. But now I'm here. He nodded. Then he frowned. How did you know I'm a Stark? She looked at Summer meaningfully, The dire wolf was the clue, and then she stared at him. Stared as if she was memorizing his face intently. I was right. Right about what? I can't tell you yet. Confused, he frowned at her. I don't understand. She smiled ever so slightly. I'll explain one day. You should join your friends. They're an interesting group. 2 of them are children of the storm. One is a falcon and the other is part giant. But you can't tell them about me. Not yet. Why not? It's a secret. I can keep a secret. Really? She smiled slightly and leaned towards him. So can I? This was deeply strange. He tilted his head. You always been here, have you? This brought in another smile. The green man opened the way here. It's complicated. Let's just say I traveled with him and leave it at that, shall we? All right. He wanted to run and tell the others who he had met, but there was something in those red eyes that stopped him. Why can't I tell the others about you? It's not time yet. When will it be time? Soon. You'll know when. I will? You will. You need to tell your brother about the door, though. He stared at her, shocked. The door in the crypts? I thought that Robb knew about it. She closed her eyes for a long moment. He doesn't, not yet. As she opened her eyes again, she seemed to pin him in place with a look that he couldn't describe. You have a long way to go. You'll get taller. I do not know the right word. We will be linked. You and I. I'll be here until you need me. And beyond that. Deeply confused, he looked at her. I don't understand. You will. There is a fate that you have been turned from, a new one that you will embrace. And you can't tell anyone that I'm here just yet. Even your friends. But they can keep this secret. Can they? No. She reached out and ran a black fingernail down the side of his face. I see now. No, they would not understand. The finger reached his lips, paused, and then she touched the same finger to her own lips, and smiled slightly. They would not understand. He stared at her, feeling that this was somehow deeply important, that something had happened. You know my name. What's yours? She peered at him again. In your language, I am called Quicksilver. I am young. I have the green sight, so I won't live as long as others. And I have a purpose. And with that, she held his face with her hands in a gentle but firm grip, kissed his forehead, each cheek and his lips with a gossamer touch, and then released, stepped back, and vaulted upwards into the canopy far above. Yaxley, teaching someone like Joffrey took a toll on a man. The boy was sulky, reluctant, and seemed to be all thumbs and left feet. He also didn't seem to understand the time it would take to learn how to fight properly. Why is this so hard? The boy had a whine that reminded him of his mother at times. I'm a Lannister. This should be easy. He stared at the boy. True learning comes through constant repetition, constant practice. You think that my skill with a blade came overnight. I was in a training yard in Casterly Rock every morning and afternoon from the age of 6. Practicing. He held up a hand and flexed it. Your uncle has a phrase for it that caught my ear once, and I liked it. Muscle memory. Do something often enough, and you can do it without thinking. Your mind prepares your muscles without you seeming to think about it. Joffrey scowled the moment that Tyrion was mentioned, but actually seemed to think about it for a moment. The Hound used to say I didn't practice enough. You didn't, he said the words harshly. Your mother thought she was protecting you. She coddled you instead. A look of misery crossed the boy's face at the mention of his mother, and he suppressed a sigh. Then he gestured at the practice dummy. Keep at it. It takes time and practice. You should have a talent for it. You're my son. Joffrey flashed a look of conflict and misery at him, but then started his practice again. He was sloppy and badly coordinated, but the basics were there. Sit by me, said a voice behind him, and he turned to see Jen, that oddly bossy wildling woman who helped out the maester at times. According to other Bane ads, she'd been married to some demented lunatic who worshipped the others enough to give up their sons, and the sons he had with the other daughter wives he had. To the creatures, Maester Aemon wishes to see you. He looked at her, noted her intent look, and then nodded. Very well, Joffrey. Keep practicing those forms. The boy grunted, but kept at it as they walked towards the master's office, up a set of new stairs and then over to the door, which Jen rapped on quietly, slipped in, talked in a low voice, and then came out again. Master Aemon says to come in. He walked past her to discover that the old maester was sitting at his desk, many books open in front of him. For a moment he thought of Tyrion with deep fondness, but then thrust that thought behind him. Maester Aemon? Serving, come in if you please. The Maester sounded tired, and Jaime looked at him carefully. The Maester looked up and then smiled slightly. Your pardon, tiredness, and worry. Sit, please. Worrying news from Winterfell came some days past, and the Lord Commander and I have been asking questions of many people. He sat as requested and then looked at the old man. What news? The Maester of Castle Black leant back in his chair and looked at him. The mountain, Sarah Gregor Clegane, is dead, and in most odd circumstances. Jaxley just stared at the man for a long moment. The mountain dead, he said, the words in disbelief. Then he leant forwards, dread roiling in his guts. How? What happened at Winterfell? It would seem that he killed the two men acting as his wardens, given his proclivities, and then tried to assault Mance Rayder's good sister, being stopped in that assault by Robb Stark. He then tried to kill Robb Stark. The dread deepened. Oh gods, he muttered. Is the Stark boy dead? Fortunately not. He was able to fight Sir Gregor off for long enough for Sandor Clegane to intervene, eventually. Between the two of them, well, three, if you include the girl, they killed him. But here is the thing, Sir the Mountain's eyes were jet black in all of this. The Master raised a gnarled finger that circled his right eye. All of his eyeballs jet black? He just stared at the Maester for a long moment. I don't understand. He was possessed, Master Aemon said, almost sadly. Master Luwin in Winterfell said that, based on a reading of a book there that I should very much like to read, he was possessed by an old Valyrian spell that allowed someone to warg into him. Something that many describe as, well, as being evil. Jane said the word by the door. Evil. Warging into a human is evil beyond words. She said the words, as if they hurt her mouth, saying them. He struggled with this for a long moment. Someone warged into the mountain? Yes, the old master said heavily. Sir Gregor had apparently told people that he had been suffering from dark dreams. It might be a premonition. He was indeed possessed, but fortunately was killed. How? Hated blurted the word in general bafflement. He was a giant of a man. How did they kill him? Master Aemon tilted his head a little. From what was written, Robb Stark stuck a dagger in his eye. This was insufficient. Sandor Clegane then stuck a sword through his chest. This, too, was insufficient. Whoever was warging the man then said, through his mouth, that he was trying to kill the wrong Stark. Whereupon Robb Stark thrust another dagger into his other eye, after which Sandor Clegane struck his head from his shoulders, which was sufficient. However, it must be said that your brother said that the warnings glowed red near the body, which was burnt. He sat there for a long moment, trying to think all of that through. The wrong Stark. Indeed, the First Ranger has been warned, and we are now quietly talking to anyone who has had dark dreams. Which brings me to you, Sir Jaime. I know that I said that you should come to me when you were ready to talk about the dark dream that you had on the way to Castle Black. But this threat of people warging into people is too much to ignore. I have to ask you this. What was your dream? He sat there struggling for words for a long moment. I was in Casterly Rock, he said, eventually. After a battle against the others and their whites that the Westerlands had thoroughly lost because of my father's inability to believe in the threat we were facing. Whited Janes with tree trunks had smashed the gates of the Lion's Mouth. We were losing. I met Tyrion, who said that we should flee, and then I went to my father's solar. There was word that Ned Stark held a fist again, but no one knew what that meant. My family was there, my father, Cersei, and, well, our son. My father agreed that the rock was lost. Cersei harangued us, and then I knew it was just a dream, I think, because there was this odd noise, and then there was this other on the back of a giant blue spider that he'd used to climb the rock. I remember dying in this dream as the hound got just my son out, and this voice in my head as I died, telling me to get up, that I belonged to it, and that was it. He looked at the old maester and was shocked to see that he was gripping the arms of his chair as if he was in pain, whilst Jen's eyes were very wide and her mouth hung open. Maester Aemon, it was just a dream. You did not know that the others have been known to ride such creatures. The oldest remaining Targaryen said the words carefully, and he felt the blood drain from his face. Giant blue spiders? Ice spiders, Jen said in tones of dread. Wildlings have seen them riding such creatures. It is not widely known amongst the Night's Watch, but is being talked about as they will have to be dealt with when they attack. Master Amin leant back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and looked at him with those Targaryen eyes. Well, now. Interesting. Where were you when you had this dream? Describe the location. In a grove of trees, in the gift, Janai explained, feeling bewildered. I slept with a blanket under my head on a tree root. Nottingham tilted his head a little. What kind of tree? A weirwood tree. When I woke and went around it to, relieve myself, I saw a face carved into it. You pissed on a heart tree? Jen spat, obviously angry. He looked at her baffled and confused before shrugging, which seemed to anger her even more. Jen, enough. The maester said the words softly, but with enough power to make her glare diminish a little. Most interesting. Why interesting? Because, my boy, I think that you have a touch of the green side. He just stared at the man, genuinely unsure what to say. The green side? Like my uncle Jarian and his son say they have? Oh, they don't just say that they have it, they truly do have it, Sir Jaime. When they were here in Castle Black, I talked to them carefully. A terrible and nebulous gift, the green sight. Divining what it means can be like trying to hold smoke. You think you have it and then it is gone, better perhaps than prophecy. Rosier thought he understood prophecy. The old man's upper lip curled into a snarl. The fool. Jaime struggled with where this conversation had taken them, but what I dreamt about, what was it then? A future perhaps, one that is mercifully lost to us. You said that Lord Stark held the fist again, the fist of winter. He now holds it. No, what you saw was like something your brother once told me of, and a dream of his own. Interesting. I must think on this. He nodded absently, still bewildered, and then he heard the sound of horns in the far distance, brassy and abrupt. Said Master Aemon as he stood. His Grace the King approaches. Sarah Chimay, if you have any dreams that disturb you, please come to me at once. He nodded and stood as well, before following the old maester to the door, and then looking up at the wall dully. Robert Baratheon was about to arrive, and Father would be in his wake. He couldn't deal with Father right now. It was time to stand his watch on the wall. Brynden? As they approached Castle Black, he could almost feel the wall, like a presence in his head. There was something there, something that he couldn't put his finger on, like the opposite of a shadow. That made no sense, he knew, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He could see blonde hair loom into view out of the corner of his eye, and he knew without even looking that it was Brienne. Do you feel it too? She asked the question with something in her voice that said that she felt the same thing that he did. The wall. I feel it. Like something I can't put into words. She nodded and eyed him for a moment. There was something between them as well, something that he really couldn't describe or put his finger on either. He liked her more than any woman he'd met in many a year, but he had no idea how to approach her at times. He was too old for her, but there was something there. He looked back at the wall, and then ahead at the approaching bulk of Castle Black. The king was near the head of column, with the other lords, but the green man was further back. He'd asked why, and the old man had smiled sadly, and said that today he'd meet an old friend who had until recently thought that he was dead. Castle Black may have had bulk, but there was no way that their full party would be able to be accommodated in it, so some men had been left behind in Moldatown, whilst others were in Queen's Crown, which was bustling again. Even then he could see that some temporary structures had been constructed to one side. He had been to Castle Black once before, years ago, escorting some volunteers for the Night's Watch from Gulltown, who Jon Arryn had firmly wanted gone from the Vale in the wake of Robert's rebellion. Then he'd noticed how shabby Castle Black looked, how worn. Now, however, the place looked transformed. He could see new tiles on roofs, new walls, new buildings, a flood of carts coming to and from the place, along with horsemen. As they approached the gates, he could see that the place was bustling, but that bustle was quietening down as ranks were formed of men of the Night's Watch, headed by Oldjir Mormont, with an older man next to him with the chains of a maester. As the king dismounted, the assembled men and women in the courtyard knelt, and he took the opportunity to look around at the faces. Yes, that brat Joffrey was there, a conflicted look on his face. But where was the Kingslayer? The king gestured, and then as the assembled throng stood, he stepped up to the old bear and clasped arms with him. Lord Commander, good to see you again. Your Grace, Mormont rumbled. Castle Black is yours. We must talk in my solar. Aye, Robert Baratheon said. And then, his face working a bit, he looked at the maester. Maester Aemon. Your Grace, the old man said with a creaking bow. Be welcome to Castle Black. Master Robin, We are kin, the king said haltingly. You are, I believe, my great-granduncle. You remind me of my grandmother, who I loved most fiercely. Rosier, the old man said with a fond smile. She was so young the last time I saw her, but she often wrote to me about how happy your grandfather made her. The king nodded choppily and seemed for a moment to be deeply moved, and then he smiled. We will talk later of her. There is much that I must repair with you. Armor creaked to one side as someone approached, and then the old man looked at the green man as he walked up to them, and then pulled down his antlered hood. Aemon, the Lord Yansha Targaryen, was pale as he looked at the other man. Duncan, I heard from the Lord Commander that you had survived. He visibly searched for words for a moment. It seems that I have much to talk about with you, and you are the green man now. I am, the tall man said quietly, so we must talk of more things than you might think. The king cleared his throat to one side before taking Stormbreaker from Sarbiaristan and then striding out into the courtyard, where all the assembled men and women looked at him. He looked back at them levelly. The call has been sent, the huge man called out in his deep voice. The realm has answered. We know what marches on the wall. We know what comes for us all. Castle Black and the Night's Watch, all of you will have the full support of the realm. This I swear by the old gods and the new. He drew his sword and thrust it in the air, and as he did so, the assembled throng raised their arms and drew swords of their own, as they cheered him deafeningly, and as they did, the runes on the bracers he wore shone. Aedmure! His sister was dead, and he did not know if he should wear black or not. Based upon father's aspect, he did not think that he should. Father refused to speak of her, even after news came that Jon Arryn had taken her head in the Red Keep. He had looked at the message without flinching, passed it to Edmure so that he could read it, beckoned with his fingers for it back, and then crumpled it and threw it into the nearest fire where it vanished. Lysa was gone, and he, if no one else did, mourned her. Yes, in her last days she had been quite mad, but she had been there to help bring him up. That counted for something, so he had quietly, in the sept, mentioned her in his prayers. It mattered to him at least, and he needed as much help as possible, because father would not last forever. He knew that. Yes, he'd rally, but the bad days where father could do little but sit in a chair in his solar, a blanket on his lap, still happened, like today. As he approached father, he looked up from the message on his lap. It would seem, he said wryly, that your search of old stones was for naught. The shield of the Riverlands was not there. It was instead in the foxhold, just over the border, in the Vale. The Kalish had it all along. He thought about this. Aye, but the Kalish are gone, surely. Lord Kalish is dead, he had no son to inherit. Father sighed. Jon Arryn gave the foxhold to a Lord Castley, the man who caught Baelish. He hissed the name with venom and hatred. Castley's steward at the foxhold was Lord Coslish's bastard daughter, who Castley had legitimized for reasons that I thought were unclear. Until now, he has married her at the Red Keep, where she bore the shield of the Riverlands. So, it is denied to us. He raised his eyebrows at that, and then sighed a little. Truth be told, he had been worried about the hunt for the shield. It had at times seemed to be a hunt for a myth, and even if it had been found, he wasn't sure about if he should wield it. Does it have powers? Apparently it shone when she first picked it up. Father shook his head and then passed a hand over his forehead as if fatigued, before laughing softly. Edmure, this past year has been like nothing I can ever remember. Legends and myths have sprung to life almost beneath our feet, and I am not well. I'm sorry, my boy. A great burden will be on your shoulders soon. Don't say that, Father. There are many years ahead of you yet. He put his hand on Father's shoulder and was encouraged by the strength in Father's hand as he grasped at his arm. Thank you, my boy. But we both know that my recent rally is only delaying the inevitable. Now, you spoke of marriage, and I might have found someone for you, although not the person you might have thought. Oh? Who is she? Rosier Frey. Father, Frey. Father sat back and satisfaction danced in his eyes. This one's different. You'll like her. Trust me on this, Edmure. He sighed. Let us talk again after I meet her. Rosierly, there were times when he almost had to bite his cheek to keep from laughing out loud in the throne room, when fools stood before the Iron Throne and did foolish things. In this case, the fool in question was Lord Piglot, a minor lord from the border of the Crownlands and the Stormlands, who bore an unfortunate resemblance to, well, a pig. Obviously, there were times when courtiers mispronounced his name. Lord Piglet today was standing in the throne room, one hand hooked into his belt and the other stiffly waving in the air as he stated his case before Jon Arryn, who was sitting on a chair just below the Iron Throne and who looked as if he was not particularly impressed by the performance. Sadly, Lord Piglet did not seem to be noticing that fact. He was more fixated on the fact that his suit was firstly one that was set against Lord Callington, who was not sadly present despite being summoned, and secondly was based on an obscure law of the First Men. Or so the Bloody Man obviously thought about that second point. Ridgely knew rather different, hence his amusement. Piglet continued to drone on, obviously oblivious to the fact that Jon was looking at him as if he was wasting his time. His suit was a land ownership matter, not a particularly significant one, but one that he obviously thought that he'd win. The volume under Renly's arm said otherwise. It was a set of notes about legal matters that had been all but codified under Renly, in one of the few things that he had to admit he'd achieved as Master of Laws. He had come to wonder about just what his legacy might be, something that nagged at him. Robert had rediscovered his strength and was doing what he did best, campaign. Yes, he had denounced Cersei's children as bastards, but he'd legitimized 3 of his bastards. House Baratheon had expanded a little, but it was still on the precipice of disaster. Stannis was Robert's heir for the time being, and was being a surprisingly good hand. And what was Renly doing? He needed to be the Lord of the Stormlands that it needed. The Stormlands were going to war soon, a war on the wall against creatures out of legend. He wondered what Father would have thought of all of this. He had so few memories of him and Mother. Piglet. Damn it, Piglet was continuing to drone on, and from the drumming of Jon's fingers on the arm of his chair, he was close to telling him to get to the point. And then he heard a door boom open, and the sound of boots approaching. Looking to one side, he saw a tall man in riding garb, a bandage around his head, with a young woman next to him, a daughter by the resemblance. Both stopped, bowed to Jon, and then glared more than a little at Piglet, who noticed them and then fell silent for a moment in what seemed to be a genuine moment of shock. Lord Callington, Jon said as he acknowledged him with a nod. Your presence here is most welcome. Thank you, Lord Arryn, the man replied. My apologies for my delay in getting to King's Landing. We were delayed by an attack by would-be outlaws on the road. Rachel pricked his ears up at this, as did Jon. Would-be, my lord. Men drobbily dressed, but rather too well equipped to be normal outlaws, my lord. We drove them off thanks to my daughter here, who joined me at the last minute with more men. He narrowed his eyes at this. There was something about this matter that made him wonder about the truth of this attack. And then Piglet, stepped forwards again. Lord Arryn, if I may continue to state my case. You may not, Jon said in a voice like iron. Something about it has bothered me for some time now. Lord Baratheon, as Master of Laws, what say you about this case? Jon was laying on the formality, and he suppressed a smile as he stepped forwards. Lord Piglet has correctly stated that his suit is based upon a law of the First Men. However, he has not stated the law in full, which is where it fails rather badly. He hefted the book up for a moment. There have been previous attempts at using this law to satisfy land ownership disputes. Those attempts have always foundered on the complete recitation of said law. Piglet glared. My lord, I must protest. I have stated the law in full. Who says I have not? The previous Lord Hand, Lord Tywin Lannister, as Renly said the words he could see Piglet go white, who stated in these notes that he had been informed on this law by one Lord Shearstone, a noted expert on the laws of the First Men. Piglet seemed to hem and haw a bit over this. I am not familiar with this Lord Shearstone, he eventually said stiffly. Surely he must have... Whatever he was about to say was forestalled when Jon raised a hand. Lord Piglet, I knew Lord Shearstone. We fought together at the Stony Sept and again at the Trident. He was of the North and knew it, and the laws of the First Men very well. Lord Lannister recommended him to me as an expert on those laws. Lord Baratheon, you say that the full law has not been quoted by Lord Piglet. It is not, Lord Arryn. Would you please read the full law? He did so, in a level voice that hid how much pleasure he was getting from the clear discomfort of the piggish lord in front of him. Jon drummed his fingers for a long moment on the arm of his chair, as he considered, Lord Piglet, it would seem that your suit against Lord Callington is much diminished by this. Piglet blustered verbally for a long moment, but then finally nodded reluctantly. Lord Kellington, what say you? Jon called out. Lord Piglet's suit is entirely diminished by this, if not destroyed, my lord, Kellington snapped as he glared at his adversary. And I must say that I am somewhat suspicious about the attack upon my party on our way here. These outlaws were very well equipped and were commanded by a young man who fled upon being defeated and who bore in strong resemblance to Lord Piglet. From the way he said that last word, he was making a great attempt at pronouncing it correctly. This resulted in more bluster from Piglet, before Jon cut him off with a wave of his hand. Enough. Lord Piglet, your suit is denied, as it has no standing in law. Lord Kellington, you own the land whose ownership has been disputed. Please provide further information about the attack against you and your men to my seneschal. It will be investigated. Piglet went even whiter, bowed hurriedly, and then all but fled the hall, his men following him. Riley sighed and then strode down to clasp hands with Lord Kellington, who nodded at him and then at the approaching Jon Arryn. My lords, my thanks. This has been a most unpleasant affair. Piglet's efforts to gain that land have been annoying. Piglet, father, his daughter said dryly, and Renly looked at her. She was tall, thin, not in the least buxom, but had a look about her that made him feel confused. She looked at him and then nodded. Lord Baratheon, I am Bethany Kellington. He took her proffered hand, bowed over it, and then released it and watched as father and daughter talked with Jon about the matter. Give that man an inch, and he tries to take a mile, Jon said, eventually. Send word if you have trouble with him again, and Quill will get to the bottom of this attack against you. I promise you. The Kellingtons bowed at this, made their excuses, and then strode off. He watched her, know them, go. He suddenly had much to think about. Yake! He stayed on the wall for as long as he could. He'd stood guard up there before and listened to people talk about the tricks required to stay warm up there. He knew how to walk about there, not too slowly as to get chilled from the wind, but also not too fast as to start to sweat. There were braziers up there as well, where he could warm his hands periodically as he stared north at the far horizon and the snowy tree-covered hills there. What was lurking in there under those trees? Where were the others and their whites? What they planning? At least Baratheon's presence in Castle Black had lifted the spirits of his new brothers. The king was on the wall, and they knew that Westeros was with them, even bits of Dorne. He sighed a little at that. Things were happening. And every time he looked down into Castle Black and saw a red cloak, he sighed a little. He would be around the men of the Westerlands again soon. And Lannisters, his kin. The family he had let down so very badly. There really were times when he had thought about stepping off the wall and ending it all. By the time that the sun started to march down to the west, he was getting hungry and knew that he really needed to get down off the wall and get some food. Sleep too. Boots sounded off to one side and then stopped. He paused, sighed, and then turned his head. Father was there, dressed in warm clothes and directing as scathing a glare at him as he had ever seen. Harrion had once said that there were times when Father looked at him as if he was dog shit on his boot, and now he was directing that same glare against him. He tilted his head back a little and then turned himself. Father, he said, staring back north of the wall, if you're expecting a witty comment from me, then you'll be disappointed. This isn't the place for wit. For a moment he felt almost as if he could feel the glare scorch his skin. But then Father stepped forwards and turned north as well, looking over the haunted forest. On my way here, I thought up almost a score of speeches to throw in your face, of the kind that I threw at her. He said that last word with such venom that Jaime flinched a little. He knew who Father was speaking of. There was a long moment of silence, and then when I caught sight of the wall, all those speeches withered and died. As I realized that I was looking at the place where my eldest son will die, a chill seemed to go through him for a long moment, because that was true. He was going to die here at some point. There was no way around that. More silence followed, and then Father asked, Why? Why what? Why did you not tell anyone of the wildfire? And why did you listen to her and do what you did? He stood there for a long moment, feeling the cold wind prickle at the sweat on his brow. I was barely a man when I was appointed to the Kingsguard, he said thickly, eventually. And just a few years older when I was left in King's Landing after Rhaegar returned and then rode out to the Trident to die. I was alone, no one to truly talk to as I started to realize that Aerys had gone completely mad and intended to burn the city to the ground in his mad obsession to become a dragon. I did what I did, and afterwards when Stark found me in the throne room, his disgust was so strong that I, I was taken aback. I did not explain why I had done it. What right had a wolf to judge a lion? He looked at Father sternly. And every time I tried to talk to you about why I killed the Mad King, you brushed me off. You always had a more important meeting to go to. I should have said something, but you were never ready to listen. And yes, I was a fool. I thought that the wildfire would degrade. I truly did. Father's nostrils flared and his mouth worked for a moment as he stared north again, and then he twisted his head and looked away as if to avoid the truth. As for her, he closed his eyes, memories battering at his mind. She was persuasive. I was insulted by people around me. Baratheon didn't love her. It was insanity. I know that now. But at the time, being stuck in the Kingsguard, with no recourse that I could see for, he clenched a hand and then rubbed his forehead briefly. What passed for love? Affection? No, I was a fool. More silence, a horrible and strained moment as they both stared north into the haunted forest. At least you admit to your stupidity, Father said eventually, in a hoarse voice. What that stupidity has cost to this family, well, you're not that much of a fool not to know. I know, he sighed deeply. How is Tyrion? In Winterfell, with his wife, he has wedded Daisy Sherstone. A weight that he had not really known was there seemed to slide off his shoulders. Good, that was good. I'm glad to hear it. I know how much he loves her. He is also my heir, Father said the words with a level inflection. It is official. Good, he almost spat. You should have done that years ago. He's a better man than I am. Clever, too. Father's gloved hands came up to rest on the wall and then curled into fists. I know that now, he said. Eventually, he is indeed better in every way. I was wrong about him. The silence that fell was the longest one yet. Father broke it. Come on down and get some food. There are plans being made that you need to know of, for this fight on the wall. Father strode off, and after a moment he followed him. Yeon. He wondered how long it would take for the smell of ash to leave his nostrils. The odd thing was that they'd been upwind of the funeral pyre the entire time, but he could still smell the smoke. They'd burnt Father's body at first light. There had just been a few there, him, Asha, the reader, a few lords of the Iron Islands. It had been a time for Ironborn only, or at least those close to the Greyjoys. At least there had been no mutters of Greenlander directed at him, even though that word was now true about him. Anyway, Father's body had been burnt on a pyre, consumed by a fierce blaze that was fueled by lamp oil. Nothing had happened to the body as it had burnt. Thank the old gods. And now he sat with the others in the great hall of Pike as they broke their fast. Boots thumped to one side, and Stannis Baratheon joined them. And then a door creaked open, and Jon and Uri came in. They were holding hands, and there was a look to Jon that he recognized in an instant. Ethe. At last. As the two last entrants made their way to the high table, he smirked at his sister. A stag, if you please. She scowled a little at him and then laughed and tossed the coin in the air at him so that he could snatch it from the air and then wink at Jon, whose face reddened a bit. Lord Harrell, Jon said eventually after he and Yarkted had sat down and then attacked some warm bread rolls. Who other than drowned men can perform marriage ceremonies on Pike? The reader, who had been addressing a plate of bacon with some gusto, looked up at this, before leaning back in his chair with a somewhat wry look. A good question, Lord Jon. Septons tend to be driven away from here on the Iron Islands. As for the old gods, perhaps the Stonebrows might know on Old Woch. He ate some more bacon. Might I ask why you ask that? Oh, he knew. His uncle had a twinkle in his eyes. Jon looked at Yrkrit, who openly smirked at him and then whispered something in his ear that made him blush a lot before looking around the room at them all. Yrkrit and I are to marry, as soon as possible. Asha grinned at Yrkrax, who grinned back from her seat further down the table. Is there not a heart tree on these islands? The wildling girl asked after snagging herself some bacon of her own. The reader laughed softly. Nay, none. Once, maybe, but not now. The drowned men would never have allowed one to exist on these islands. They would have chopped down and burned any that they found. Even before Harrenhor started to build Harrenhal with every piece of wood he could find. This made Jaeger look genuinely baffled, and she exchanged a look with Jon, who muttered something about finding someone somewhere to perform the ceremony. He looked intent, and Theon knew exactly why. He wanted a wife, not a lover. And then have legitimate children. No bastards. They all continued eating, and Theon found himself wondering about what lay ahead of them. The trip to Great Rock and the Stone Brows, and then what next? It had to be back to the mainland and the north. And then the doors opened again, and as he looked up, he could feel his jaw drop. Mother? Mother was walking in, on the arm of a man clad in green, with a dark green cloak with horns attached to the hood. A green man? Chairs scraped as he, the reader, and Asha all stood almost as one. "Lainey?" the reader asked in an astonished voice. Mother came to a halt and then smiled slightly before curtsying hesitantly. She was still thin, still visibly strained, like butter scraped over too much bread. But there was something different about her. There was a focus and a poise that he hadn't seen before. The last time they'd met, on Harlaw, Mother had been weepy and yet almost distant, as if she thought he was a shade of the past, a ghost, a memory. But now, there was a look in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "My husband is dead," Mother said, in a level voice that shook a little at the edges. "And my daughter is now the Lord of the Iron Islands. I am here to support her in every way. And this green man here has helped me to see certain truths at High Herselaw." She looked at Nuncle Roderick, certain runes. Nuncle Roderick blanched. "Lainey, the runes are terrible." But Mother waved a hand in dismissal. "They confirmed certain feelings I'd had for years." "Years, Roderick. You read a lot. Can you deny that you did not have doubts too?" The reader stood there for a long moment, his face working a little. "I cannot," he said eventually in a hoarse and strained voice. "But we would be fools if we did not acknowledge that there will be others who cling to the old way." He looked at the green man. "And who would you be?" "Alwyn of the Isle of Faces, my Lord Harlaw," said the man with an accent of the north. "And I am a green man. I am here to meet with the Stonebrows, who sent a message to the Isle. Old connections must be remade." He stared at the man. "Old connections? What old connections?" He must have muttered the words out loud, because all of a sudden, the green man was looking at him. "The Stonebrows and others can tell you the story. But there were always those on the Iron Islands who would send their sons and daughters to the Isle of Faces, when they heard, well, call it a different kind of call, a longing perhaps, or dreams. Word was sent. Word came back. It was quietly done. That made sense, and he nodded slowly as he looked at the man with the green cape and the antlered hood. "There is no godswood on the Iron Islands, though." "No," the green man said quietly. "The drowned men were always jealous for their own god. They would never brook any sign of the old ways." He smiled slightly. He seemed to be waiting for something as he and the reader escorted Mother to the table and sat her down, watching as Asha and Theon scrambled to find a plate, cutlery, and food for their mother. It wasn't his imagination. She did look better. After a long moment, as Mother ate quietly, Asha looked back at the green man. "Green men normally tend to godswoods. Are you here to plant one? If Lord Hollow will permit it, perhaps one on Hollow, but first one on Oldwyke. The Stonebrows and others have waited a long time. Their patience must be rewarded." "Won't that make them targets?" Theon blurted out the words. "I mean, if they weren't already, surely that will make them doubly so." The green man smiled a little. "I think that there will be those who will defend them, no matter what happens. Winter is coming, as do the others. As you know, word came of their attack here. Yes, there will be fools who deny it, but more will believe now." He looked at Asha, who looked deeply conflicted. He knew why. Even now, despite everything that she had seen so far, there was still conflict within her. Some roots lay deep. Then she took a deep breath, after Great Wake, "And perhaps, Harlaw, we will talk. Alwyn of the Isle of Faces," she said in a troubled voice. "Talk of many things." The green man nodded, but it was Jon who spoke next. "Alwyn, can you marry people? As a green man, under the eyes of the old gods?" The man from the Isle of Faces turned and smiled a little. "I can, Jon Stark." Jon blinked at this, as did Theon, but then he looked at Ygritte, who was beaming by his side as they both stood. "Then we have a marriage to carry out." "Bradier. The arrival of the king had also meant the start of a great many meetings and planning sessions, because the king, the Lord Commander, the First Ranger, the Master of Arms at Castle Black, and himself had spent a long time talking the previous night. But then all of that had been about the affairs of the Night's Watch and how the repairs to the castles on the wall were progressing and what else was happening. The other matters, the more personal ones, well, those could only wait until the next day. And now he sat in his study, a cup of moss tea in his hands made by the fiercely protective Jen in his hands, waiting. Craster's widow seemed to have decided that he was in need of her protection. Well, she had her numbers and was surprisingly literate, not that he had pressed her for her full story. She would tell him if she wanted to. Such things needed tact. A brief smile twitched at his lips. Appearances were so illusory. Were they now at times? She had come to Castle Black as a wildling, but now she was very much more as she showed off that hidden side of hers. Rosies bloomed in the most surprising places, at times. A fist pounded against the door, and he looked up. The door, please, Jen, and then, as we discussed, please leave us. This will probably be His Grace the King. She sniffed, but he had indeed discussed things with her beforehand, and she knew that privacy was important now, and then walked over to the door to open it. Opting the other side was indeed King Robert, who strode in with a certain hesitancy, nodding at Jen as she curtsied quickly and then slipped out, closing the door behind her. Your Grace, Aemon murmured as he bowed. Be welcome to my study. The king looked about the place, at the ranks of books and papers, and nodded choppily at him. Great-grand-uncle Aemon. He pulled a chair out and sank into it, looking strained and troubled before finally looking him in the eye, and sighed. I have already apologized to Ned Stark about this, but I really need to apologize to you above all. I am sorry about Rhaegar's children. They should not have been killed. It was all on Tywin Lannister. He sighed himself. Tywin always was one for the darker gambits of the Game of Thrones. Aye. The king ran a large hand over his face. I never thought that I'd ever be king, just the Lord of the Stormlands at Storm's End. By the time I got to the Red Keep and saw Tywin Lannister standing next to those bodies, obviously expecting me to be pleased whilst judging me with those cold green eyes of his, I reacted as I thought he'd expect. It wasn't until I saw Ned's face that I realized that it was as wrong could be. I was wrong. I'm sorry. They were kin to me. I never understood react. Not many did, he replied wryly. He would write to me, you know, letters about prophecy and legend and what I knew about the Wall and our family. He thought he was touched by something. He thought that there was a destiny he had to fulfill. By the end, though, his letters were dark things indeed. He wrote of terrible mistakes he had made. He raped Lyanna Stark, Robert said in a voice like iron. I know what he did. All of it. I know that it sounds strange, but she came to me in a dream when I was in Winterfell. I know that sounds mad, but she said that the walls between the living and the dead were thinner there. He looked at him carefully. I have sworn an oath about what Lyanna told me. His voice dropped to a whisper. I know the truth about Ned's son. He is not at risk for me. I have sworn it. After all, he's family. A weight he had not known was on him lifted. That was good. You must tell me more about this dream in time. But first, he looked over his desk and grabbed the precious package he had taken out earlier. Please read these when you have time. Your grandmother wrote to me often, letters of humor and wisdom and love. She loved your grandfather fiercely, and of course your father and you and your brothers. As he handed the letters over, he could see how much the king was moved, as his face worked and tears appeared in his eyes. I recognize her handwriting, he said softly, as a large hand fingered the cover of one of the letters. Gods, but I miss her. She was very proud of you. He took a deep breath. Her letter, after Summerhall, broke my heart. When Daenerys died after just 3 years on the throne, she was deeply upset, and then, well, there was Daenerys. She often wrote of her worries about him, and she was right what he did. He shook his head in distress. I knew from your grandmother's letters that House Targaryen was on the brink of disaster. I hoped that your father's friendship with Daenerys would temper him. After he and your mother died, all I had was fear. Especially after Rial died as well. Nothing but fear. There was a long moment of silence in the room as they both stared at the past. And then Adaman said, At last, Daenerys murdered Rickard and Brandon Stark after Rhaegar abducted Lyanna Stark. When word came of those crimes, I knew that House Targaryen was doomed. He reached out and grasped the king's forearm. I know that this will surprise you. Coming from a man with my name, but you were right to do what you did, to rebel against the Iron Throne. Daenerys was mad. Mad enough to murder Lord Paramounts and order the deaths of other Lords Paramounts. And Rhaegar was a man obsessed with a prophecy that he did not understand. and which led him down a dark road, indeed. Even your father would have rebelled. Robert Baratheon looked into his eyes for a long moment and then nodded choppily. Thank you. Yes, I know what you mean, he sighed gustily. In the meantime, I have much to do here, whilst trying to work something out. We met giants on the way here, and they said that I was the man who brought storms with him, whilst Lyanna said that I need to let her go and become the Storm King. I was destined to be. He spread his hands in bafflement. How? Is it a Durandon thing that is tied to Stormbreaker? Is it more complicated than that? Involving my Targaryen blood? Is it prophecy, something I don't want to touch with a bloody barge pole because of Rhaegar and his madness? He leant back and pondered matters for a long moment. There is much to discuss there, and much for me to research, and I will do my best to give you answers. My very best. Robert smiled at him after a long moment. Thank you. One last thing. The Green Man says that we will need Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. That might mean that House Targaryen becomes a part of Westeros again, somewhere. We should discuss where and how she should be approached. His face worked again. I have doubts, but I am willing to think matters over. Apparently she vanished after Pentos fell to the Braavosi, but I'm sure she's out there somewhere. She has 3 dragons after all. She too has a destiny. A little more weight fell from his shoulders. I agree, my king. He paused. Your grandmother would have been very proud of you right now. The king chuckled. Ned once told me that I always find my way back to the true path eventually, after prodding. Perhaps he's right. Another sigh. I lost my way before. Ammon, please help keep me on the right path now. And so he reached out and clasped hands with Raziel's grandson. Robb. Bran always had the same look whenever Mother brought him into Father's solar for his daily lessons. It was a look that combined dread with sullen sulkiness. He knew that the lessons about the North could be dull, but it wasn't dull enough to make his little brother slump in such a way. Bran, he said, eventually, you need to learn this. His brother just glowered at him for a long moment. Why? It was remarkable how much wine he could put into one word. You need to know about how the North is run. You need to know about which house is which, what relationship they have with House Stark, what their local rivals are, which friends they have, what they trade, what they grow, what's changed, and so on. A lot's changed after the Company of the Rose came back and started to reunite with their kin or rebuild from scratch. You have to learn all of this. But I'm never going to rule the North. Your father's heir. And then Jon and Sansa and Arya? He sighed. Bronn, father was never supposed to rule the North. Uncle Brandon was. No one imagined that he and grandfather would die in the way that they did. And that's why you need to learn, especially as you're the heir after me. Sansa and Arya are girls, and although Jon has been legitimized, he follows Rickon in the succession. His brother scrunched his forehead. But that's stupid, he muttered. Jon's older than me. Sansa knows more than me. Arya's a better warg than me. It's the way it is, Bran. Boys before girls and bastards after the legitimate children. Bran glowered again. It is the way. Stupid way. He returned to the books. But Robb could tell from the side glances he was giving him that there was something on his little brother's mind. Eventually, he looked at Bran. What's wrong? Bran looked shifty. Are you still looking for something here in Winterfell? Yes, he smiled thinly. I have no idea what, but the Green Man told me to look. That said, it might be more about the journey than the destination, as I've been looking at a lot of books about the earliest days of Winterfell. From the look of bemusement on the face of his brother, the last point had sailed far, far over his head, so Robb sighed yet again and then asked, Why do you ask? The shifty look intensified. Well, Bran said, and then he was interrupted by a knock on the door, which opened to reveal Maester Luwin with a message scroll in one hand. Your pardon, Lord Robb, but you need to see this at once. The old man strode over and held the message out, which Robb took, read, and then repressed a groan over. Ah, he said eventually. So Alekine and Delena Florent are on their way to Winterfell. Luwin, could you please pass the word to my mother and Sarah Courtney Penrose that I need to see them at once? Luwin coughed a little and then slid his hands up his sleeves in the way that he did at certain times. I took the liberty of anticipating your orders as I came here and have already done so. He smiled at the master. Lupin was an absolute gem at times, and it wasn't long before he heard the sound of footfalls and voices in the corridor outside before Mother and Sarah Courtney arrived, their faces curious, and he stood to greet them. Mother, Sir Courtney, this just arrived. He handed over the message, and then watched as Mother held it so they both could read, and then react too with slight grimaces. I've been expecting this, Sir Courtney said eventually. Ever since word went out of Edric's legitimization, the Florents will be here in numbers, and his mother will want to make sure that he remembers that he's half Floren. Those foxes aren't stupid. They are both cousins to Lady Baratheon. Are they not? Robb asked as he dredged up what he knew about the Reach. Will she welcome them, given Edric's new status? Mother tapped the message against her chin as she considered the matter. Perhaps the fact that Stannis is formally Robert's heir at the moment, until a later decision is made, might complicate matters. I don't know enough about the Florents to guess otherwise. Based on this message, they won't be here for some weeks. They're sailing to White Harbor and then riding from there, so it should depend on tides and winds. I'll talk to Edric, Sir Courtney said gruffly. Tell him that his mother is on the way. He pulled a slight face. The Tyrells won't like this much. I know. Mace Tyrell's dead, and Wellis Tyrell has a head on his shoulders. But the Florents have always had a better claim to Highgarden than the Tyrells, and it's foolish not to admit that they won't look on Edric as a possible threat. With your permission, Lord Robb, I'll have a word with Ser Roderick, Castle, about security. Robb nodded, and the Stormlander inclined his head and walked out, leaving him looking at Mother. Could you have a word with Lady Baratheon, Mother? She's difficult to talk to at times. The ghost of a smile crept over Mother's face. She is indeed. I shall talk to her and will be most careful in my use of words. Luwin, how goes her pregnancy? Master Luwin visibly weighed his words. It progresses well, my lady. I am watching carefully what she eats and how much she does, and am telling her why as I do so. The North seems to agree with her so far in terms of her health, and I am wondering what the noxious airs of Dragonstone might have done to her in terms of her past pregnancies. He paused. I am also talking to various servants to keep an eye on who serves her food, noting who remains who served the former queen. I recognize that this might seem a trifle paranoid, but promised Lady Baratheon that I would do my best to see her pregnancy to a successful conclusion, and I intend to keep my word. He blinked a bit at the intent manner in which the maester spoke, but then realized his wisdom and nodded. As Mother and Luwin departed, talking softly, he leant back in his chair, and then he looked at Bran, who had been watching the whole thing with a look of extreme impatience. Can I go and talk to Edric about this? His mother's coming. Robb directed what he hoped was a quelling look at his little brother, who deflated a bit. Bran, you need to finish your studies for today. This is something you need to work on every day. His brother rolled his eyes and then sighed in a highly exaggerated manner, but then returned to the books. After a moment, he looked up. Robb, what I was saying about you still looking for something. I think that I might. There was a knock on the door, and they both looked up to see Jory Castle at the entrance. Beg pardon, Lord Robb, but there's a party of free folk in the Great Hall. The Lady Val says that her mother is here. He stood so quickly that Grey Wind jerked upright in a rush from his slumber with Summer, and looked around for whatever enemy had alarmed his owner. Brain jerked back in his seat as well, until Robb gestured at the books. Keep reading, and then he strode out with Jory at his side and Grey Wind at his heels. As they reached the door to the courtyard, he looked at Jory. Find more Summer. If you please, Jory. There were indeed free folk in the Great Hall, with 5 men in their distinctive bronze armor acting as escorts. Some of the free folk looked a bit bewildered, some looked curious, and then there was the tallish woman who looked about the hall with a combination of familiarity and unease. Val and Dalla were standing next to her, looking happier than he had seen them look for some time. As he approached, Val glanced at him and then turned to face him. Lord Robb, this is our mother, Rowan. Rosier looked at him with eyes that had widened a bit, and then she curtsied in a way that made some of the other free folk look at her in a rather bewildered manner. Well now, she knew her curtsies. We expected you a week or more ago, Daddle said with a slight frown of concern. Is anything amiss? I was delayed, Rowan replied softly. There was much to see and, well, there were many people on the road. That seemed a thin excuse, and he eyed her carefully. You've been here before, he said in a low voice that made Val and Dalla both stare at him. Winterfell is not new to you, is it? Rose stared at the ceiling, the floor, and her daughters, before looking at him with what seemed to be tears in her eyes. I never thought I'd ever see it again, she said in a choked voice, and that really made her daughters stare at her in shock. Mother? Val asked in a voice that made her sound as if she was trying to hold a lot back. And then, in a rush, What do you mean, ma'am? But before Rowan could reply, another voice spoke. I thought you were dead. Morzamber was in the nearest doorway, Jory next to him, the one-eyed man's face as white as a sheet. I chased after the Horzens who took you. I went beyond the wall looking for you. I thought that you were dead. His face worked in agony, memories chasing across his features. Rose's face fell as she closed her eyes for a long moment, and then she faced Morzamber. Father, I thought you were dead. I almost was. Her face worked for a long moment. You almost found me. He had a knife to my throat, 10 miles north of the wall. You were there with 50 men, all mounted. I was about to knee the Horzen who took me in the balls, but he knocked me out first. Morzamber closed his eyes as if in agony. I thought I heard something at the time, but my men thought otherwise. Gods fucking damn it. He took a step towards her, almost hesitantly. Rose, she burst into tears and then ran into his arms, as Robb marveled at the change in the huge man. He'd always viewed him as the drunk brute of the Umbers, but here he was, looking as if he was about to burst into 1,000 pieces with emotion. Why didn't you come home sooner? Did that Horzen have you chained up? Rowan Umber smiled, a savage smile. He died, father. Hard to breath after you have your freshly severed cock and balls stuffed down your throat. The hall echoed with the sound of Morzamber's laughter. That's my girl. Then he looked at his daughter. I take it that there's a but then I met a better man. Their father, she said, gesturing at a visibly gobsmacked Val and Dala. Jerome. His name was a good man. I gave him 2 daughters and a stillborn son, and then he died. In a fight against the others. Mace Raider, Dala's husband, said that he cut Twin's head off his shoulders after he was dead so that he couldn't be raised again as a white. Morzamber looked at the 3 women for a long moment, and then he drew his daughter close to him again and kissed the top of her head. I have a lot to think about, he said eventually in a husky voice. I've always hated fucking wildlings after they took you, but now I'll think about it all. My daughter is returned to me, and I'll not forget that, Lord Robb. And I have granddaughters. One's married to Bloody Mance Raider, and the others... He looked at Robb fiercely. Tree her right, boy. Tree her right, or I'll have something to bloody say to you. He nodded to the hulking man, and then he looked at Val, who had a look on her face that combined shock with sudden hope. I will leave you to talk to your family. Umbers, all, Val, Dala, Umber. He nodded formally, and then looked at Val. We must talk. We will talk. She said the words with utter finality, and the look in her eyes. He had to be careful now. So careful. There was something precious hanging in the air, and he could not jeopardize it. So he nodded again and then strode off, almost in a daze, back to Father Solar. When he reached it, he could see that Bran was somehow still sitting there and almost vibrating with tension. What happened? Val's mother, Rowan, is in Winterfell, Bran, and she's Morzamber's daughter. His brother absorbed that. So Val's an Umber? Yes. Are you going to marry her? He considered that, perhaps, if she says yes. Bran sat there for a long moment. So, things are happening? He frowned slightly. Yes? What do you mean? Bran sighed and scowled at the same time. Robb, I've been trying to tell you something. There's a door in the crypts. A door that you can only see when you warg. Is that important? He sat there for a long moment as all his dreams of a fast marriage to Val hit the obstruction of Bran's words. Say what again, Janie? He was tired of the way that Father's men avoided him now. They eyed him as if he was diseased. Oh, if one of them had to speak to him, to pass on a message that Father wanted to talk to him, they did that quickly and curtly. But on the whole, they regarded him a cursed man who had brought shame to the Lannister name and to the Westerlands, and who would die here on the wall. Which was all quite true. Adam Marbrand, his old friend, was among the men, and so far he had successfully avoided him. He had no wish to see Adam turn his glance away from him, to look embarrassed at where the former Golden Lannister of the Kingsguard was now. So he'd spent time up on the wall and training Joffrey in some more out-of-the-way places. His son had been sulky and distracted, obviously thinking about his old life and how unfair everything was now that he was no longer Prince Joffrey Baratheon, and now merely Joffrey Hill. He needed to have a quiet word with Father about making sure that Joffrey didn't persuade a Lannister guardsman to help him. No Lannister could abandon their vows, not now, grandson or not. Father would not stand for it. And now he was sitting in a corner of the main hall of Castle Black, looking down at some boar sausages in a stew that was actually quite tasty. Fresh, crusty bread, too. Tollett had told him that the food had improved since the call. Compared to what he was used to, it was tolerable. And then a hand fell on his shoulder, and someone sat down next to him as he ate his stew. Startled, he looked at the fellow, and froze. Adam, cornered you at last, Adam said with a scowl. You can't run off or skulk away around a corner because you saw me. His old friend looked him up and down. The beard suits you for this location. You're a bit skinny, you look like shit, and you're an idiot. There, I've got that off my chest. He sat there for a moment, almost choking with emotion at the words of his oldest friend. Adam, waff, Adam said through a mouthful of stew. You are not a popular man, and Adam's free hand smacked against his chest. Piss on that. Do you really think that I'm a fair-weather friend? That I'd turn my back on oldest friend? Just because you're on the wall now, after doing something truly stupid? God, Jamie, what did you take me for? He wanted to put his hands over his face and cry for a moment, but he pushed it back. Thank you, Adam, he said eventually. Thank you. Adam looked about the room carefully, and then lowered his voice. Gods, what a mess. I talked to Tyrion in Winterfell before we left. He sent his best and asked me to give you this. A letter emerged from his jerkin, and Jaime took it with a smile. Before you ask, he's doing well. Very happy with that wife of his. I'm not sure which of the two of them reads the more. A good match. He looked down at the letter, which had his name on it in Tyrion's bold and distinctive hand. I'm glad he's happy. His oldest friend smiled at him and then addressed the sausages in his stew again. After a moment of chewing, he glanced up again. I'm surprised you haven't had your jaw dragging on the ground about the other people here. Jaime felt his brow furrow. Who do you mean? The king? My father? Adam stopped eating and directed a very odd look at him. I know that you've been on the wall a lot and teaching Joffrey not to chop his foot off, but you must have heard that. He looked around as two people walked into the room and made for the head table. He was in Castle Black. He looked around. The man was older than he was, and looked like, is that the Blackfish? He blurted the words with some astonishment. Ser Brynden Bloody Tully. Gods. He stared at him and frowned a bit. He's younger than I thought? And who's he with? At first he'd thought that the Blackfish's companion was a young man. But no, despite the leathers of a man, he was a she. Tall blonde, not pretty, but a lively face, and clear blue eyes. Who is she? Brienne of Tarth, the Even Star's daughter. And I have no idea what it is between the two of them. They both have green cloaks and the same clasp like a horn, and before you ask, yes, the Blackfish has less gray in his hair than I remember. And no, they're not a couple, or perhaps not yet. He watched as the odd pair sat and then started to eat after helping themselves to food. The Blackfish, the bloody Blackfish. Remember when we used to bladder at each other with wooden blades when we were boys? Adam smiled wryly. You wanted to be as good a fighter as the Blackfish, a knight as good as he. We lived for the tales of him in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Him or Sir Duncan the Tall. Gods, the arguments we had over who was better. And now they're both here. Jaime shook his head slightly. Both? I don't understand. Adam eyed him again. You did hear that the Green Man is here, didn't you? Oh, that, he shrugged. I heard that the call had brought out a few green men from their island, or so someone said. I didn't believe it. They never leave the Isle of Faces. Adam gaped at him, giving a view of a half-chewed sausage. Then he hurriedly chewed and swallowed. Oh, he said eventually. They left all right. The coal released them. Did you hear it? The coal... He shook his head. Not really. There was a dream, I think. And I felt something, but no. I didn't hear it. Did you? His old friend went still, his face working for a moment. Do you remember how we once talked about how old Ashmark is, how there was a castle beneath the castle? It must have been old. Yes, my father and I heard the call. Father sent help to the wall as soon as he could. It was like nothing I've ever experienced. There was a moment of silence as Adam seemed to go away somewhere in his own mind, and then he shook himself and returned. But that's not as important as this. Yaxley, the Green Man isn't just any Green Man. He's the Green Man. The head of his order, if you can call it that. There's tales of him battling the Faith Militant with the Blackfish and Brienne of Tarth by the shores of the God's Eye, and before he was the Green Man, he was Sir Duncan the Tall. This was ridiculous, and Jaime threw his old friend a disbelieving look. Idiom, are you drunk? Seer Duncan the Tall died at Summerhall. No, said Adam with a shake of his head. He was injured there. Gods, you should see his arm and the burns on it. But he lived and became the Green Man. Don't ask me how he's lived this long. I couldn't tell you. Something to do with the Isle of Faces and old gods. But it's him. Your father says it's him. Something cold seemed to run up and down his spine for a moment, and he wanted to shiver as he looked about. It was insane, this tale, but if Adam said that father said it was true, gods, then he paused. Why had father not told him about this? Oh, they had talked in a desultory manner after their meeting on the wall, but it had not been a real talk. Not really. Father was not good at small talk. He shook his head again and then readdressed his stew and the sausages within. I feel like we're living in a song, a tale, a legend. Adam snorted a little. We'll be fighting legends. Myths, I might have said once. But now, after seeing those cages with those heads and hands, we're fighting for everyone south of us. Everyone in Westeros. Well said, a deep voice behind them rumbled, and they both jumped a little and turned in their seats. There was a tall man standing behind them, dressed in green leathers and with a deeper green cloak that had a hood with what looked like antlers draped on his shoulders. He was old, slightly bent, but there was a look about him that told Jaime that he had seen a lot of fighting and retained a lot of vigor. This was no weak old man. There was also a weighing, considering look to his glance as he eyed Jaime Tide that made him feel most uneasy indeed. Sir Duncan, Adam said thickly after a moment. How fare you? Well, Sarad Adam, the Green Man said after a moment. And you are Saradakai Lannister, he said as fact, not as a question. Jaime flushed a little and stood to bow slightly. Sir Duncan, now that he could see him closer, he could notice that he fitted the description he'd read, even seen a picture of once. His skin crawled with the madness of it all. The Green Man observed him for a long moment and then smiled the merest of half-smiles. Come and see me in 2 days, Sir Gianni. You and I have a journey north of the wall to plan out, he nodded to them both, and then strode away to the same table as the Blackfish and Brienne of Tarth, leaving the two men gaping at his back. Jaime eventually closed his mouth and sat down heavily, Adam mirroring his actions. He had yet another feeling that his life was about to change. Robb? It looked like a stone wall, stone laid on stone, with the merest hint or mortar every now and then. There were runes carved in paces on the topmost course of stones, and also on the lowest course, but it was otherwise an unremarkable wall in the crypts, in a passageway that led towards the lower and older levels of tombs of long-dead Starks, and there was no doorway there that he could see. He looked at Bran, who was biting his lip and looking like a boy who was either worried that he wasn't being believed, or needed a piss, or both. Summer, on the other hand, was sitting next to Bran with a look of utter unconcern. Here? Robb asked. You're sure, Bran? Here, Bran said firmly. I'm sure. How did you even see them whilst warging? Bran looked at him whilst he knotted his fingers together briefly. I was looking for Virmax's eggs, he admitted eventually. The king said that they weren't likely to be in here, as it's narrow and Virmax was big. But we thought that perhaps if Virmax really squeezed up and narrowed out, then... He caught sight of Robb's upraised eyebrow and sighed. I know. I wondered if Summer might be able to see something that I couldn't. So I warged into him and looked and didn't see a thing until I got here. There's a big door here. Or at least it looked big to Summer. He's still small. Robb looked back at the wall and then glanced at Grey Wind, who was staring at the space that Bran had pointed at. The direwolf had his head quirked to one side as if puzzled by something. Wargian to Grey Wind and see Robb. Bran sounded excited and he repressed a sigh. Warging was still something that he was getting used to, even with regular practice. Bran and Arya, and yes, even Sansa, seemed to be far more adept at it than he was, so far, even if the latter had been a little unsure about it first, due to the lingering remains of Septa Mordane's strictures. Speaking of whom, Septa Mordane had been talking about going south of the Neck to the Isle of Faces. Mother was still trying to puzzle through her reasons, but it was clear that Mordane's feet were on a different path than before. So, he sighed a little, sat down opposite the wall, his back against the other wall, and then half closed his eyes and sent his mind into that other place, where he could start to grasp his way through. All of a sudden he was off to one side, feeling smaller but furrier, and he made a note to try and remember that all of a sudden he had no arms but 4 legs. He blinked and then looked at his own body, which was sitting there with white and unblinking eyes. He looked at Bran, who was looking excitedly at him, and at the wall where... He took a step back. There was a door there. There really was a door. He stared at it. There was a join in the middle, were stone like the stones around it, with carvings that stretched up and over the top, that looked like the trunk and branches of a tree. At the curve at the top, he could see an arch of runes, and he scowled a little. They were archaic. And then he looked down. There were 3 sets of handprints. They looked like slight depressions, 6 of them, and the middle ones were smaller than the others and looked a bit different from the others, although he wasn't sure why. A moment of confused impressions, and then he was back in his own body and standing hurriedly and running his hands over what felt like a smooth wall. "Gods," he muttered before standing back. "I saw it, but can't feel it. Magic! It must be magic." "Did you see it?" Bran asked with excitement running through his voice. "You saw it, didn't you?" He turned and grinned at his brother, before ruffling his hair, provoking an indignant squawk from him. "I saw it. There's a set of double doors here with runes over the top and places for hands. Odd." He looked back at the wall and ran his hand over his chin. "Most odd. Do you think that Vermax's eggs are behind it?" Instead of rolling his eyes, Robb instead made himself look patiently at his little brother. "Rungsten, the runes are in the language of the First Men, and there's no reference at all to them in any record. They're old. When Jaethur's Valerian was here with Varmax, I doubt the doors were open." He looked back at the wall. "No, these are truly old, and we need help on this." Almost as if, in answer to his last words, he heard distant footsteps approaching. And then Jory appeared, looking as if he had been running. Seeing his face, Robb straightened. "Jory, what's the matter?" "Word from the Iron Islands, Lord Robb," Jory panted. "Balon Greyjoy is dead, and the Lord Hand wrote that there was an attack by the others on Pike." Shock froze him in place for a long moment, and then he shook himself free of it all. "What? Are you sure? How?" "Master Luwin has 2 ravens with the same message, Lord Robb. All I know is that the attack was a failure, thanks to Lord Jon and Lord Greymist, as well as the Lord Hand. Asha Greyjoy is the new lord, or perhaps Lady of the Iron Islands. Bran, take Summer and go back to the courtyard. I'll talk to Tyrion and Daisy about what we found. The runes will need to be translated." He could see Jory frown in puzzlement, and he gestured at him. "Never mind that, Jory. Where is Master Luwin?" "Lord Stark's Solar, Lord Robb. I was one of many sent to find you." He nodded, and then, with Grey Wind at his heels, he ran. Others on Pike. Hell, and how much time did they now have? Oberyn. He'd never thought that he'd be grateful to see the wall in his life, but he was glad to see it now, that line of white on the horizon. They'd be there by that afternoon, if this wind held true. And as Seaworth had said that it would, then he saw no reason to doubt that. If Stannis Baratheon, the tooth-grinding, stubborn fool that he was, did not know that Sir Davos Seaworth was a gem of a man, albeit a rough one, then he was an absolute imbecile. There had been 3 times when Seaworth had ordered a change in course that had probably saved all of their lives. The first time had been 4 days after departing King's Landing. He had been quietly talking to Seaworth about their course when the man had stiffened suddenly, literally sniffed the air, looked at the pennant at the mainmast, and then recalled where he was. Nodded formally to him, begged his pardon, and then said that there was a squall coming and that they needed to change course. Bemused. He had said yes immediately, whereupon Seaworth had started to bark out orders and then oversee the flags needed to communicate those orders, so that the flotilla changed course enough to hug the coast of a particularly unattractive and rocky part of the southern Vale. Shortly after, a squall had indeed turned the sea to white mist off to the east, where they would have otherwise been sailing. If they had been in that spot, they would have been in desperate trouble, or even a puff of green fire. Afterwards, he had simply looked at Seaworth and said that if he ever sensed the same thing, he was to shout orders first and ask his permission second, as his dignity, in this case at least, was less important than dying in an instant because of the wildfire exploding, due to a rope not being pulled on at the right moment. And then there had been that one truly odd moment. As they had been sailing north, at one point he and others in the crew had heard what sounded like a deeply submerged voice, moaning a single repeated word, "Beware." As a man with ties to Essos, he had a feeling that he might know what had been bellowing the word. As they sailed on, he frowned and then scampered up the rigging to the crow's nest with his marish spyglass, before focusing and then squinting. Only then did he allow himself the luxury of a grin. "Deck there?" he bellowed. Far below he could see the helmsman and Seaworth next to him. "Look up." Eastwatch by the sea, in sight, just 3 degrees off the port side. Waves acknowledged his words, and he shimmied down the rigging, and joined Seaworth as he bellowed orders and arranged for signal flags to be hoisted. It was all excitingly nautical, and he hoped that he'd be able to dock himself with someone who had a nice tight opening as soon as they made landfall. By the time that they finally beat into the harbor at Eastwatch by the sea, he was thanking the notes that Sorella had sent him about what to wear this far north. Mother Rowan's tits. But was it cold up here? There was a reception committee waiting for them at the docks, led by a short, lean man with a widow's peak and a bit of a beard. As the gangplank went down and Seaworth leant over the railing, the man stepped forwards. "Still alive then, Seaworth?" "Aye, still alive, Pike." There was a moment of silence, and then the 2 men both grinned as Seaworth strode down the gangplank and embraced the other man. "You old whoreson, how are you?" "Still alive, despite the dead." Pike's face sobered. "You've brought a load of Aerys Targaryen's madness then, as was ordered." Seaworth nodded before gesturing at Oberyn. "We have, Cotter Pike. This is Prince Oberyn Martell of Dorne, who has made it safe for now. I trust you have a place for it." Pike nodded shortly. "Aye, as ordered. Grandma Maester Pytzel's instructions have been followed to the fucking letter, or so I'm told. We've built a building that should take it all safely." "Thank you, Pike," Oberyn said formally. "It should be safe for 2 days or so, as we have used certain powders on it when we left King's Landing." The bearded man nodded with a grimace. "Horrible fucking stuff! But that said, it should be useful against those blue bastards and their unliving ranks." "What's the latest word?" Oberyn asked intently. "All the wildlings, or those of them who are still alive, are now south of the wall," said Pike grimly. "The giants, too. It was a good thing we got to Hardhome with those ships when we did. 10 days later, the place got walloped by a snowstorm that you wouldn't believe. I saw it on the horizon as we sailed away with the last of the wildlings, and I swear it got colder faster than I've ever known, as it came close. Not that they had anyone at Hardhome left to raise into a white. All the wildlings were gone, their dead were burnt. The ice drake skeletons, too." "Ice drakes?" Oberyn asked, his eyebrows shooting up. "I thought that they were a myth, and, as much a myth as the others in their whites." "I saw those skeletons, Prince Oberyn," the man in black replied somberly. "I don't know if there are any alive now, but there were once. Explains a lot about Hardhome, and how it might have died." "But no news otherwise?" Seaworth asked shrewdly. "No assault on the wall?" "Nothing," said Pike, which sounded like relief. "Which is good, men, aye, and women, and supplies come in every day on ships from all over Westeros. But we're still repairing the castles west of us here, and the gift and new gift will take time to start producing food again, even with all the wildlings." There was a way that he almost spat that last word that spoke volumes about the way that he really felt about them. That said, the man was obviously trying to repress those thoughts. He thought about twisting his tail a bit, but then decided that such a thing would be a bit petty. "Which reminds me, there's a letter for you, Prince Oberyn. From a maester called Ollerus, or something like that." He pulled out a rectangle of waxed leather with its edges stitched together, that had his full name written on it, and he took it with a mutter of thanks. "Ser Davos, I'll read this, whilst you get the ships organized with Commander Pike here." The Black Brother looked a bit confused at the title, but then Seaworth started to talk and lead him away, and as they left, Oberyn pulled out his smallest knife and attacked the stitching. Inside was indeed a letter, and he pulled it out with fingers that were just a little clumsy due to the gloves he was wearing. Yes, it was from Sorella, and he frowned at the news she had listed. She seemed to have written it in installments as news came in, and then sent it, quite recently, from Castle Black. So, Jaime Lannister had indeed taken the Black, as had been reported and was on the wall. That whoreson Tywin Lannister must have choked on that, as well as the fact that the dwarf was now his heir. He bore no ill will towards the man. Not with the memories he had of Cersei making him cry as a baby because she was a creature of hate and bile, and he would make a far better Lord of the Westerlands than his brother could ever dream of being. He wondered what Doran was thinking now that Robert Baratheon was single again and obviously looking for a wife. Did he have a plan for Arianne? Well, if so, he had reservations about sending another Marcel anywhere near King's Landing. And what was this bit about runes and making them glow by carving them onto bronze bits of armor with bronze tools whilst praying to the old gods? He chewed a lip briefly. Interesting. He'd have to try that. But then the hurried scrawl at the end of the pages rose off the paper and hit him between the eyes. The mountain was dead. The monster who had haunted his dreams for so long, the man he had imagined killing in oh so many endlessly inventive ways, was dead. He wanted to exult that Iaya was finally avenged and then scream with frustration that he had not killed him with his own bare hands. There had long been a vial of manticore poison that he had wanted to test on Sir Gregor fucking Clegane. But now the man was dead at the hands of Robb Stark and Sandor Clegane. And in such circumstances, possessed by foul magic, probably Valyrian at that, was the verdict in Winterfell. And he had to say that he couldn't disagree. He searched his mind for any mentions of such magic in his time in Essos. There had been a mention, briefly in Volantis, about the great deeds of Valyria. He'd been at a gathering where it had been the fashionable thing to talk about the Valyrians, and the things that they could do, things that, on reflection, were enough to make anyone with any sense shudder. Yes, just because something could be done did not mean that it should be done. He'd heard things about Gogossos that had given him nightmares. So, someone had possessed the mountain. Who, and why? Which Stark had been marked for death, and again, why? He slid the letter into a pocket and then strode off to rejoin the others. He had a lot to do and a lot to now think about. As soon as the wildfire was properly secured, he'd head for Castle Black. For one thing, he didn't like the way that his daughter wrote about this Alyrian Lannister. He might be Targaryen Lannister's son, who liked to stick two fingers in the general direction of his brother. But he was still a Lannister. Domimra. Luckily, Sainsa had been with him when the message had arrived that Robb wanted to see him at once, that there had been some sort of an attack by the others on the Iron Islands. His beloved could be trusted to make sure that his loot wasn't dropped or unstrung or mistreated in any way. There were times when he could see Arya looking at it in a considering way, as if she was pondering mischief with it. He hurried down the corridor towards Lord Stark's Solar, nodded at Jory Castle, who was outside it, panting slightly, and then went in. Robb was inside, staring at the map of Westeros on the wall, with a pale Lady Stark to one side and a scowling Tyrion Lannister on the other, while Stacey Lannister was off to one side consulting a large book. "Robb, you sent for me?" The heir to Winterfell nodded and handed over a raven message, which Domeric unscrolled. As he read the words, he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. "The others attacked Pike? How is that possible?" Robb gestured at the raven message and he kept reading. "They used icebergs, with the others and their whites embedded within them. How is that even possible?" "They're not human," Tyrion Lannister said as he continued to stare at the map. "We need to stop thinking of them as human adversaries. They have resources and magics that we do not understand or have forgotten about. Too much time has passed since we last knew them. They became legends and stories, and we dismissed them as such. However, Daisy, anything in that?" His wife looked up from the book. "Nothing. There has never been an attack by the others that bypassed the wall in such a way, or none that was ever recorded." "Humph!" Tyrion smiled his thanks at his wife, who smiled back, and then returned his gaze to the map. Domeric swapped a glance with Robb and joined him there. "Why Pike?" Tyrion almost snapped. "Why there? No other reports of attacks, or at least so far, so why there?" Robb tilted his head to one side as his eyes swept the map. "Any number of reasons," he said eventually. "A reconnaissance in force, a trial to see if it could be done. An attempt to create a lodging on a place that would have been utterly unprepared for them if it hadn't been for Jon, Theon, and Ygritte, as well as the Lord Hand, or it might have been something to do with the madman, Euron Greyjoy." Domeric shivered slightly as he looked at the message again. Euron Greyjoy had killed one brother and fatally wounded another, Kinslear, cursed by every god. He squinted at the small writing at the bottom of the message. "Your brother writes that Euron Greyjoy vanished after the attack. How is that possible? And what's this about wanting to replace the drowned god?" Robb shook his head in bafflement. "I know not, but I don't like the fact that he said that he had allied himself with the others. As to the drowned god, well, there was a thump at the door, which opened to reveal a panting Maester Luwin. My lords, my lady, Another message from Lord John. He held out twin scrolls and Robb snatched one out of his hand and unrolled it in front of him, whilst Luwin gave the other to Lady Stark and Daisy. The writing was tiny and there was much of it as the scroll could take, but as he read it, Domeric could feel his eyebrows arch upwards. Madness, he breathed eventually. Sorceress! Madness! A cursed ship and a creature made of blood and bones, or what John thought was such a thing. Robb shook his head in horror. Why, was it Euron Greyjoy's crew? Who else would make such a thing? Tyrion Lannister raised a finger, his eyes tightly closed, and everyone stared at him as his face showed the deepest of calculations. Luwin! The word burst from his mouth and made everyone jump. The Book of Valyrian Practices, it mentioned the work of fleshsmiths, did it not? The terrible spells that my Uncle Jirion might have seen the evidence of. The kind of horrors that Godros might have held. Did it not? Luwin nodded with a look of revulsion, but Tyrion kept on wagging his finger. And that story of what Ned and Jon faced at Barrowtown, the things in the fog, made from bone, we know that Euron Greyjoy has been voyaging all over the world, perhaps even to the Smoking Sea. What if he picked up knowledge from Valier and then combined it with something he learned from the others? He found that the sensation of blood draining from one's face was a singular one that was not very nice. As he looked at the others in the room, he realized that they too were feeling the same sensation. Euron Greyjoy possessed the mountain. Daisy said the words in horror. But which Stark was he aiming for? If not Robb, then who? And why? Ned, Lady Stark was ashen. He's gone south to deal with the gate at the High Tower, where the drowned god is. It must be he that Euron Greyjoy is targeting. We must warn him. She staggered, close to being overwrought, and was deftly caught by Daisy and Luwin, who escorted her to a chair, the maester then scurrying over to the table to give her a little wine in a cup. Euron Greyjoy intends to replace the drowned god, or steal enough of his powers to become a god, Tyrion breathed. Luwin, is Lady Stark all right? The master inspected her face for a moment, and then nodded slightly. I think a sleeping draft after this, though. Can someone else send your fastest raven to the High Tower? Luwin nodded. Aye, Lord Tyrion. The heir to Casterly Rock caught the eyes of the heir to Winterfell, and the heir to the Dreadfort. Then we have a vitally important message to write. Now, he paused, and we'll use the second and third fastest to the High Tower as well. Ned must be warned in time. Gendry! He stood at the door to the forge and looked out at Castle Black as it started to come awake that morning. There were certain things that had to be done of a morning, and one of those things was to light the forge, or rather the first forge. There were 3 of the buggers now, and he thanked the gods for Lord Stark, who had arranged a steady supply of coal to Castle Black and the other castles as they were restored. He didn't know how he felt right now. Too many names. He was just about starting to get used to being called Gendry Baratheon. But that wasn't all that he was being called. He was called Gendry Strongarm by some, Gendry Runesmith by others, that bastard boy by yet others, gods. He was tired of it all. He was certainly tired of avoiding Joffrey Bloody Hill. The brat obviously still seemed to be pissed off at his very existence, let alone his new name and the fact that father praised him so widely because of his rune-carving abilities, which was a bit daft because Maya had discovered them as well. Well, at least he wasn't trying not to be noticed by anyone in Lannister Red anymore. Yes, many of them tended to look down their noses at him, but it seemed that the old lion had made it clear that any more unfortunate events, like the attack on Robb Stark by the Little Ponce back at Winterfell, would not be tolerated. The old lion was one scary fucker. What was also scary was the weight that was on him, right now. A weight that he worried about. He talked about to Lord Roose 2 nights previous, about how much he admitted that he didn't know about making runes, about how he was afraid of making an error. What were the rules about rules? What did they mean exactly? How did they combine? Could they even be combined? He knew a lot about being a blacksmith. He could make any manner of hand weapon, be it axe, sword, flail, mace, or spear tip. He knew how important weight was, and heft, and thinness of blade. He knew how to judge a metal by its color when heated, to tell when was too cold to beat it, and when was too hot to quench. He knew all manner of quenches, which oils to use, which blends, the moment to quench. He knew all about making handles for all kinds of things, again with the width and length so dependent on the man or woman wielding it. But now he was carving runes and making them glow, and he was both proud of the fact that he could do so, and terrified of fucking it up by making some mistake that one of the first men runesmiths in the depths of time would never have made even as children. The words had tumbled out of his mouth, and he ended up slightly breathless as the bearded old lord of Runestone just sat there and looked at him with those measuring eyes, and after a long moment, the lord had just smiled at him and clapped him on the shoulder. By the old gods, you've got a head on those shoulders of yours, Gendry. Good lad, those are the right things to worry about, the right questions. Lad, you're not alone on this. I've sent ravens to Runestone, the Fender already working on things, and Lord Redford and I have men here as well, and you. He'd reached out to one side, snagged a book from the table, and held it out, and here you go. It's yours. Taking it with a frown. Oh, it was a book about runes? So, that will teach you a lot about runes. It's a copy of an old book from Runestone. Don't lose it, lad. It's valuable. It's mine, though. He'd said the words a bit faintly. It's yours. Study hard, lad. There's a lot riding on those runes. He looked down at his hand and the book it held, and then he turned back into the forge, put the book carefully down to one side, shrugged his jerkin off, put a leather apron on, looked at the sheets of bronze to one side, and then reached out and opened the book. He had a lot to bloody learn, but learn it he would, and he was Gendry Bloody Baratheon, and he'd thump the skull of any snooty twit who said otherwise. Ned. The further south they sailed, the warmer he got, and he liked it not. It reminded him too much of Dorne and his search along the border of Dorne and the Stormlands, until he and his companions finally found the so-called Tower of Joy. He knew that he'd have nightmares about that bloody place until his dying day. Friends lost, his sister lost, a burden placed upon him, and a sword he had to give back to its rightful owner, and the woman that, in a more sane time, should have been his wife. They'd made good time in their voyage south, but he would still find his fingers drumming on the wood of the railing where he'd stand after his daily walk about the ship. Whenever they were at sea, he wanted to be there already. He didn't want to spend more time than he had to on this. There was too much to do in the north. They docked a few times for supplies, and his brief time at Lannisport had left him with the peculiar feeling that the Lannisters were taking things very seriously indeed, judging by the way that the port was starting to react to the messages from Tywin Lannister in support of the call. Of course, there had also been the way that so many of them had reacted to his presence in the Westerlands, staring at him and then muttering about the call and cheering him, and their astonished reaction to Frostfire, who had taken the opportunity to go hunting along the shore and then vanished for an hour or so in the woods to the west of where they had moored, from the feeling of happy contentment he felt from her direction, as well as the blood around her muzzle when she came back. She had found a good enough meal to take her through her next long nap, almost hibernation, which seemed to be her way of getting through the voyage. After all, a dire wolf couldn't exactly squat at the heads on the ship. And the more he thought about the fact that he was feeling what Frostfire felt, the more he wasn't worried. He was coming to terms with it. He was, at some level at least, a warg. Father would have been proud of him. He knew it. Astonished first, but then proud. The winds were kind to the ship, not too strong, not too soft, and as they headed south he ticked the headlands and landmarks off in his mind as he consulted the maps. He had to admit that the southern lands made him more than a little envious. Green fields, villages all over the place, towns in areas that made best use of the coast or the land, and as they approached the borders of the Reach, he became even more envious. Rich lands, rolling fields of wheat or barley, orchards almost groaning under the weight of their fruit, windmills working industriously away. And then the thought of all of that withering under whatever this mysterious thing was that he'd been called upon to help young Wellis Tyrell with, made him pause and almost shake his head in horror. The Reach needed his help. This trip was worth it. He had to be here, even though Starks did not prosper south of the Neck. Well, at least he was dealing with Willis Tyrell, and not Old Nace. That said, he had long wondered if the man had been a complete fool. The siege of Storm's End had been long and curiously clumsy. Had he done that on purpose, or had he merely been an idiot fixated on something that he lacked the wit to achieve? Would anyone ever know, now that he was dead? It was just to the west of the Shield Islands that the first cry came from the crow's nest that there were ships ahead coming towards them. Captain Morgan, a blunt man from Torrance Square who knew these waters like the back of his hand, sprinted up the rigging with his Myrish spyglass, took a sighting, and then descended via a rope. "A squadron of Reacher ships, Lord Stark," he said, looking puzzled. "And unless I am very much mistaken, one of them is the Arbor Queen." That was a name that made him think back to the Greyjoy Rebellion, and he frowned slightly. "Lord Redwine's flagship? Aye, my lord, we're almost at the Shield Islands, but not yet near the Arbor, so I'm puzzled." As the ships drew closer, a great flurry of signals burst out from them, which Morgwyn ordered be answered with signals of their own, and then the squadron shook into a clear shape and approached, signaling again. "Lord Stark, Lord Redwine wishes to come aboard at once," Morgwyn said. "Urgent dispatches. They're signaling." Ned nodded, a frisson of dread running through him. "Dispatches? Here?" The squadron of ships came abreast of them, and then turned southwards to join them in unison, and Morgwyn muttered that they seemed to be almost decently handled. And then they all collectively slowed as a boat was lowered from the Arbor Queen. Paxter Redwine was a little older and a little balder than Ned remembered him from the Greyjoy Rebellion, but what remaining hair he had was still red, and he still had that look of half amusement and half bellicosity that his sons had obviously inherited, as he hauled his way with practiced ease up the rope ladder that had been let down for him and came level with the deck. He looked about, and then saw Ned and nodded firmly. "Lord Redwine," Ned said, bowing to the man as he stood on the deck and took a deep breath. "We meet again." "Lord Stark," Paxter Redwine bowed deeply and then looked at him. "The call was heard at the Arbor. House Redwine answers it." He smiled at the man. "And House Stark is grateful for what House Redwine has already done. Your sons were both at the Wall and beyond, as they shall tell you." He looked to one side at where a group of other men had gathered and where there were two red-headed young men who looked as if they were barely restraining themselves from dashing over and flinging their arms around their father. "And they have very much to tell you." "Horsenhaber," Paxter Redwine beamed at his sons, but then sobered. "I must greet them in a moment. First, Lord Tiber sent me to get you to Old Town, came with unsettling news from Winterfell." He looked at the older man's face, and ice seemed to run up and down along his back for a heartbeat. "What has happened, Paxter?" The Lord of the Arbor held out a message. "There was an unsuccessful attack against your oldest son, Ned. It's a mad tale, one that made me shake my head. But after getting the earlier letters from my sons about what they saw and witnessed, well, you need to read this." He read it and found his forehead creasing from shock and bafflement. The Mountain had killed 2 men, almost assaulted Val, and then had come within a hair's breadth of killing Robb before he and Sandor Clegane had killed him. And what was this about black eyes in the most literal sense, and the words about Robb being the wrong Stark? "This is madness," he breathed as he absorbed the implications. "Sorcery, and Valyrian sorcery at that." Apparently Tyrion Lannister's daggers, being the work of the first men, reacted to the body of the Mountain, Paxter Redwine pointed out. "I heard that you bear the Fist of Winter. Perhaps that will also warn of Valyrian black magic." A shiver ran up and down his spine. "I don't know, Paxter. I don't know. Hopefully it will." "I hope it does," Paxter Redwine said seriously. "Because if you are the right Stark, that means that you need to be protected and defended. I know what worries Wellis Tyrell, and that terrifies me. We need you in Old Town, at the High Tower, and every man under my command knows that. So we'll get you there, Lord Stark. We'll bloody well get you there." And only then did he bow formally and then go over and greet his sons, leaving Ned staring down at the message in his hand. Someone might be trying to kill him. Well now, let them bloody well try it. "Robert," he stood there at the top of the wall and stared north. Bloody hells. It was cold up here. The wind like a knife through you if it blew hard enough from the north, and he couldn't quite imagine what it would be like here in the winter that was to come. Worse, far worse than anything he could imagine. He'd known a winter or two in the Vale, when the Eyrie was too cold to be lived in and everyone descended to warmer quarters. At the time, he'd thought that that had been the coldest place ever, not compared to how this place would get. Well now, best that he started to get used to the cold at the Wall, whilst they still had summer to enjoy. At least he could start to plan things out now, and he narrowed his eyes as he looked at the trees that stretched off into the far distance, and the snowy hills and mountains that he could just about see beyond that. He disliked that damn forest already. You could hide a damn army in that mass of trees, and for all they knew there already was one there. The last of the wildlings were still trickling in, the rearguard in some cases, composed of men and women who had been fighting the others and their whites for months or years. They were all equipped with spears and arrows tipped with dragonglass these days. but they spoke of the enemy having numbers that could swamp even the best-equipped force. Fire was still the best deterrent, something that kept the white-haired fuckers back and destroyed their whites. But even the hottest fire could be snuffed out by snow. He thought back to that dream he'd had in Winterfell, and the other that had been hunting Lyanna. It was something that still brought a chill to his spine when he remembered the way that the other had looked at him. He'd fought all manner of men before: Dornish, Rebel Stormlanders, Reachmen, Crownlanders, Rivermen, and Ironborn, but they'd all been men with the faces and expressions of men. That other had been, well, wrong. Alien was the word that he'd heard Maester Aemon use. Yes, that was the word. The right word, too. It had looked at him with a look of such indifference, as if he was a beetle beneath its boot. Insignificant. He wasn't used to that. He huffed a little and looked at the forest again. He needed to memorize the view from here, and from the Night Fort, and all the bloody castles. They all had people in them again now, even if some of them were little more than ruins that were being rebuilt. Time was their enemy as well. Now they needed to rebuild much after centuries of neglect. There were times when he wanted to curse his bloody ancestors, the Valyrian ones at least. The Baratheons and the Targaryens had been too obsessed with cementing their control over the Seven Kingdoms whilst neglecting the needs of the North. The Night's Watch had been protecting all of them, but they hadn't realized that. They'd seen it as this odd northern tradition, or the Stark's private army, or some such rot. The castles should never have been allowed to fall into disrepair. They would take time to repair, rebuild, reman gods. He wished that Ned was here with him now. They needed to plan so much. Boots sounded to one side, and he looked over to see Tarly approaching, and then bowing. "Your Grace." "Tersey." "Up to see the potential field of battle?" The bald man quirked a smile at him for a moment before nodding at the silent spectre that was Ser Barristan Selmy to one side. "Ah, Your Grace, I do hear tell that you are not fond of a siege." Bought him a tight grin. "Stony Septimier." That was a nasty little corner. Pike was better to be the besieger than the besieged. He felt his eyes tighten as he looked north again. "We must hold them here. Best place to fight. Narrowest point to the south is the neck, and I don't like the idea of being up to my neck in foul-smelling mud and marsh, do you?" "No, Your Grace," said Tarly. "The logistics will be nasty once winter comes." "Aye, and we can't gamble too much with the men," he sighed. "Every man, and women, I've seen them down there, that dies might add to the enemy's number. We have to take that into account. Whites, bloody magic, pain in the arse, but we can't ignore that. And this place," he gestured at the wall. "When winter comes, we'll need protection up here for the men from the wind. If they're freezing to death from the wind as they keep watch, the enemy's winning already. And what if they attack in a blizzard? Can you imagine it?" Turley shivered a bit as he looked north as well. "Aye, you have the right of it, Your Grace," he said. Eventually, covered wooden walkways, perhaps with wool between planks, duckboards to tread on, and braziers suspended from the ceilings. It will be expensive, but glass windows here and there. "Enough to keep the men alive up here whilst watching and waiting," he agreed. "And then we need to have the ground in front of the walls surveyed. Where is it higher than the land around and where lower?" Tatsley eyed him with a frown, and then comprehension dawned. "The wildfire. Aye, not much point using it on the buggers if it flows downhill and against the bloody wall. We need maps, Tarly." The Lord of Hornhill nodded. "I shall talk to the Lord Commander and get onto it once, Your Grace." And then he was gone, walking briskly away. Well now, Taxley was a man like him, born for war. He thought about the sad shadow of a man he had been that Robb Stark had seen in the future that was now gone from them, and sighed for a moment. Gods, how had he let himself go so badly? But then that was gone. He was here, now, at this time, and he was fucked if he'd fail in this. He'd not lose this bloody war. There was too much at stake. More boots to one side, and he looked over to see the green man approach him. "Do you know that I still have no idea how to address you? Ser Duncan? The Green Man? What should it be? The children of the forest have a title for me, but I fear that neither of us can pronounce it." He chuckled at that, before sobering. "What's amiss? I will be heading north into the haunted forest in a day or so with young Jaime Lannister on a... Well, I need to meet an old acquaintance there." The old man smiled slightly. "But before that, I need to talk to you about something else. You have come far this past year, but you need to go further. You must put aside your hatred for Rhaegar Targaryen. It is holding you back, just as your grief for Lyanna Stark did. If you are to become the Storm King that we need you to be, you must move on." He clenched his fists for a long moment as he felt his nostrils flare. "You ask much. There are things that you need to understand. This is important. Your Grace." He closed his eyes for a long moment and then nodded choppily. "And how can I? What would you suggest?" "Come with me, you and Barristan. I can show you both what is needed." They followed the Green Man down to the bottom of the wall, and then they mounted the horses that he had ordered saddled. He frowned and then looked at the Green Man. "Where are we going to?" "North of the wall. We need a heart tree for this." Ser Barristan looked up at this. "North of the wall, is it safe? Should there not be more of us?" "It is safe," the Green Man nodded. "We have time. The others are moving, I sense, but they are still well north of us." They had to ride half a league to a grove of weirwood trees, and he stared at them as they dismounted. 9 of the trees had faces carved into them. Faces that seemed to peer at him as if the trees themselves were wondering what and who they all were. He shivered slightly, more in unsettlement than anything else. "What should we do?" he asked in a careful voice. The Green Man walked to the middle tree and placed a hand on it before extending his other arm off to one side. The sleeve rolled up despite the cold. "Barristan has done this before, Your Grace. Take your gloves off and hold my bare arm." Frowning a little, he pulled off the leather glove on his right hand, and then he and Ser Barristan did as the Green Man had asked. "What?" Darkness fell, and he had the unsettling feeling of falling straight down. Everything too sudden to utter a word. And then, suddenly, he was on the ground, looking around wildly. It was dark. It was warmer. There were men singing off to one side, and he could smell wood smoke and food cooking and horse dung. It was a camp, the camp of an army. Someone somewhere was using a whetstone to sharpen a blade, and he could smell a latrine somewhere. The trident. The words were spoken by Ser Barristan Selmy in tones of shock. "This is the trident. Before the battle at what became known as the Ruby Ford, this was our camp. The camp of Rhaegar Targaryen," the Green Man rumbled, "who had been at the Isle of Faces not too long before." He was about to mutter something about where that whoreson was, when suddenly he saw movement to one side, and then a white-cloaked figure strode straight through Selby's body, passing through it as if it did not exist, before coming to a sudden halt and looking around almost wildly. He blinked. It was Selby himself, or rather a younger version of him, more color in his hair and fewer lines on his face. "I remember this moment," the older Ser Barristan said in a stunned voice. "The night before the battle, I had the oddest feeling, as if someone had walked over my grave. I was sensing myself." "Some circles take time to close," the Green Man said gravely. "But yes, you were." The Selmy from the past looked about again, before shaking his head and striding off towards a large tent which was surrounded by guards, and then flaming torches and then banners. And the largest of the banners was one that he had not seen for some time. That bloody red, many-headed dragon on black. The Targaryen banner. The trio followed him, before slowing slightly, as 2 more white-cloaked figures approached. Ser Barristan. Bloody hells. It was Prince Lewin Mortel, along with that earnest bugger Jonathor Darry. "What news?" "Little and none of it good," the younger Selby said gruffly. "We know who faces us now, and in what numbers. No reinforcements will reach us in time for tomorrow. And Lord Tyrell continues to besiege Storm's End with his full army." Mortel and Darry both pulled faces. "Still?" Darry barked. "He could invest it with 1/10 of the man he has and march north to meet us." "He could, but he has not," the Selmy from the past said. "He is either a fool committed to this siege, or he is betraying us." The 2 Kingsguard traded looks. "I always thought Mace Tyrell to be a damn fool," Martell muttered. "Perhaps I was wrong." "And what of Lord Lannister?" "Nothing. Ravens are sent but return with nothing but empty words. If that, the lion has retracted his claws. Then we must do what we can with what we have. Even then..." Darry looked about and then beckoned the other 2 Kingsguard closer, making Robert also approach. To one side, Ser Barristan had his eyes closed, as if in pain, whilst the Green Man was staring at the large tent. "Morale is not good. Connington's men are dispirited by their defeat at the Stony Sept, and the Riverlanders are all asunder. The rebels are in full accord, however, and they are flush with victory and match our numbers." Darry shook his head. "We need more time and more men. Barristan, You must speak with the prince, persuade him from this course of action. His plan is, well, I think it unwise. How is his mood? Darry and Martell exchanged glances before the Dornishman answered, also not good. He sleeps badly, he looks tired all the time now, and he seems dispirited, although he received a letter from King's Landing early today, written by little Rhaenys, which has lifted his spirits a little. To sell me from the past. Gods, this was strange. Frowned a little. I wish I knew what happened at the Isle of Faces. He was downcast before and then truly depressed after that. Martell glared at Darry. If you had bloody well done your duty and stayed with him on that bloody island, then... I could not, Darry glared back before an unsettled expression crossed his face. Prince Rhaegar instructed me not to follow him, that I could not come with him, that I had to wait at that jetty. But I tried to walk down that path between those white bloody trees, and I waited a moment and then tried to follow him by walking through the trees. But after a few minutes I lost sight of him, and then somehow the path was gone. I swear it, my brothers. I wandered and I ran, and I looked, and then I was back at the shore. I ran again, back to the jetty, and the path was gone. I know this seems like madness, but, well, it was gone. I walked, I looked, I went back into the trees, but there was no path. Every time I ended up back on the shore, heading back to the jetty, I swear it. Something kept me from the prince, and then, after a while, I looked up, and there he was, walking back on the path, looking like he does now. The green man chuckled slightly to one side. The Isle of Faces keeps its secrets well. Martell was looking at Darry in bafflement, before looking back at Selmy. Barristan, you must persuade the prince to change his mind. If we must fight the rebels tomorrow, then we must be at his side. The plan of his to scatter us across the battlefield. It goes against every one of my instincts. We must be there at his side. If we can press hard and kill one of the main traitor lords, then we can prevail against them. Should Stark or Arryn or especially Baratheon falls, then their ranks will waver and split. The younger Selby looked uncertain, but then nodded. I will try. I cannot promise anything, but I will try. And so they followed him as he walked to the large tent with the Targaryen banner. Robert swallowed back his bile as they approached it and forced himself to be calmer than he felt. Gods, he couldn't believe that he was here. Seeing this, the Selmy from the past talked to the guards by the entrance to the tent and then entered it, and they followed him in. Sarah Burriston had an odd expression on his face as he walked by Robert's side, and the green man had a look of faint distaste. He saw his cousin at once as he entered the tent, and could not help the growl of hate that emerged from his throat. And then he blinked as Rhaegar Targaryen looked up from the papers on the table in front of him, and for a moment seemed to look straight at Robert, his eyes widening for a moment, before he saw the other Selmy, and by all the gods he could see that Rogier looked terrible. He was pale. He looked as if he had not slept properly for a week at least, or a month. Such were the black lines under his eyes, and his hands shook slightly. Barristan. The Barristan from the past bowed. My prince, what news? The scouts have confirmed we face the full force of the rebels, my prince. They match our numbers. Baratheon is here, along with Stark, Tully, and Arryn. The morale of our men is not good, and the Tyrells and Lannisters are not here. My prince, surely we should wait or retreat to gain the advantage of numbers and better ground. Rosier looked at him and then around the tent, before sitting again at the table and passing a trembling hand over his eyes. If morale is not good, then how many would desert if we retreated? Some cravens would flee. I will not deny it. But if we sent messages to Lord Tybriel, ordering him, in the name of the king, to send us just a third of his host, then we can prevail. The man that he hated so much bit his lip for a moment. He seemed genuinely torn. What was so clear a week ago is not anymore, he muttered. And what was clear this morning is also not clear. He closed his eyes for a long moment. I must think on this, Barristan. Rhaenys wrote me a letter. The past Selby looked confused for a long moment at this change of topic. A letter, my prince. She is so young and yet so talented already. A letter to her daddy telling me about her cat, Balerion, and telling me to beat the bad men and come home so that she can kiss me on both cheeks and show me her cat. The Selmy from the present closed his eyes in anguish, and Robert felt himself swallow. No, that poor child. The Selmy from the past nodded. Your daughter is much loved. She is. Rhaegar looked about the tent again. Barristan, I need to think and also to pray. I will call you once I have made a decision, and please move the guards a little away from the tent. I must not be overheard. My prince? Barristan, double the guards if need be, but move them and yourself away from the tent. I must not be overheard. The Selmy from the past looked confused, but then nodded and strode out of the tent, calling out to the captains of the guard. As he did so, the Selmy from the present looked at Robert. I remember this. We could hear him talking at one point, but no one knew what he was saying. We will know now, the Green Man said grimly. He doubted the path I told him to take. It was hard for him not to after his child wrote to him. There was a long moment of silence in the tent as Rhaegar looked at the letter in front of him, but then, as the sound of men marching away from the tent diminished, he looked up again. You're here again, aren't you? The presence I felt in the hall of the Green Man at the Isle of Faces, I heard something, sensed something. What are you? Who are you? The old gods? My ancestors? The silver-haired young man walked about the tent slowly. I know it must be done tomorrow. I know, but how many must die before my own sacrifice is enough? I know that I must die, but I want to live. I want to see my daughter again, and hear the tales of her cat. I want to see my son again, and the daughter that Lyanna will bear me. I have a wife that I still love, a mother that I must protect, and father whose crimes I must make right. But how can I, if I must die? His face crumpled for a long moment, and he sank back into his chair again. I am not afraid to die, but I also want to live. So, tell me, what must I do? There was a horrible, strained silence in the tent. Robert looked at the man, an unexpected sympathy welling up for him, matching the hatred. Gods. He looked over at the Green Man. And yet he will still fight in the morning. What are we here to do? Draw Stormbreaker, place the tip of the sword on the ground in front of you, hold the hilt with both hands, and trust me, your grace. The Green Man closed his eyes for a long moment, and then when he opened them again, there was a red fire burning in them. He will see you, and you will know when and what to speak. He did what the Green Man had said, drawing Stormbreaker from his sheath and holding it as he had been asked to, and as his hands wrapped around the hilt, a wind seemed to come from somewhere to the south for a long moment, making the flames of the candles that lit the tent bend horizontally before returning to normal. Rozier looked about wildly as the wind struck, but then relaxed, and then his gaze reached Robert and he froze in his chair, his eyes widening. For a long moment he sat there, and then he stood shakily. Robert, he asked, the question in a low, uncertain voice. Is that you? How can you be here? And so, changed? He half raised a hand before his eyes for a moment. It is you, but yet not you in robes and with a sword, and your face. He froze. Your face. You are older. I am older indeed, he ground out through gritted teeth, looking back at you. Your sword, the clouds around you. I see lightning and hear thunder as if Rhaegar's eye widened again. You are the Storm King. Come again. He swallowed and then shook his head a little. The Storm King. So, I was wrong about that again. Prophecy, wrongly interpreted by me. Again. Prophecy? He asked the word with a scowl. About what? I thought that the power of the storm was something that would follow the prince that was promised. So, you are the Storm King. I'm trying to become that. You're looking back from when or where? 16 years. I'm at the wall. The others are coming. Ned Stark has sent out the call. Rhaegar screwed his eyes shut. Then I am dead. That you are. Robert, cousin, I am sorry. Everything I have touched has withered and died. I am sorry. So sorry. The realm is broken due to my foolishness and stupidity. I thought I was obeying prophecy. I was wrong. I should not have done what I did. And Lyanna, please tell me that she is at your side now. He took a deep breath. No, she died. Rozier groaned deep in his throat and scrubbed at his eyes for a long moment with both hands. How? You left her in a lonely tower in the Dornish marches with 3 idiot king's guards without a clue about how you deal with a girl who was pregnant after you raped her. No master. No midwife. She died of childbirth fever after giving birth to a son. And now Rhaegar moaned and sank to his knees on the rug on the floor, rocking with anguish before beating at the ground with his fists. After a long moment, he looked back up at him, his face smeared with tears and anguish. So I was wrong yet again. You were. Rhaegar Targaryen ran a hand over his face, and then he slowly stood and wiped the tears from his face. What hope do you have now? Some of the realm rallies. The castles on the wall are being rebuilt. We will fight. Then tomorrow I must die. Rhaegar looked him in the eye, resolve building on his face. Do not tell me how, but I do I not? You did, Will. It was clean. Then, again, I must. Your Grace, the Green Man said softly, step back. Take your hands off the hilt. He will see you fade. He nodded and did as he was told. Rhaegar's eyes widened again as he looked about the tent, before nodding and then walking back to the table and picking up the letter from his daughter. Barristan. There was an acknowledging shout, and just before the Selmy from the past entered the tent, Rhaegar ignited the letter from his daughter on a candle and then threw it into the nearest brazier. My prince, my orders stand. We fight tomorrow. You and your brothers will command and fight where I have ordered you to. The army needs leaders. You must be those leaders. I will do what I need to, and there will be no discussion on this. I understand your objections, but my orders stand. I command it. No argument, Barristan. I command it. The face of the Selmy from the past worked for a long moment, but then he nodded sharply. Very well, my prince. I will order it so, as you command. And with that he was gone, his white cape billowing behind him. Rhaegar strode over slowly to a side table and poured himself a large goblet of wine. So I die on the morrow, he said softly, before taking a large swallow. As it must be, he held his goblet up. Robert saved the realm, and then he drank again. The scene seemed to shiver and freeze. And then suddenly Robert was back at the heart tree, releasing his grip from the arm of the Green Man, and then falling to his knees. Only then did he weep.